y'all, welcome back. Let's talk story stuff. So not too long ago, I finished a show that was really interesting, but also got me thinking about the difference between external and internal drives in a character, why they're so important, what the difference is, and why it's important to know that difference. As far as I understand it, those two things come with a lot of different names depending on who you talk to. In my screenwriting class, for example, we differentiate them as the need and the goal, I believe, but I've also heard them described as the goal and the desire. Maybe you've heard them described differently. Here's how I understand them. In order to have a compelling character, they need to have a few things in place, but two of those things are, one, the thing that they are trying to accomplish in the world around them, whether that is making it to the Lonely Mountain and back again, or opening up that bakery that they've always been dreaming about, or trying to find the treasure map hidden on the back of the Declaration of Independence. It's not just something they think about, it drives them to do in the story, which is what generates a lot of our action and a lot of our forward movement in the plot. I think of this as the goal or the external goal, and it's super important because if you didn't have this, then your character would feel no need to do anything but sit around and think about stuff. Second thing you need, though, is some kind of internal drive. It's not necessarily a goal, it's more like something in the character, maybe something that's broken in them or lacking in them, that drives them to always make a certain kind of decision, whether they know it or not. I think it's usually a lot subtler than the external goal. It's something that the character is not necessarily aware of, but we as the reader can pick up on it pretty quickly and see, okay, this person is driven by a need for acceptance, and that need makes them always kind of respond to adversity in a certain way that we can pin down. If I'm reading a book about a person trying to open a bakery, I might be less interested in actually seeing them open a bakery than I am in seeing them overcome their, fear of rejection. I think of that as the need instead of the goal because it's not something that the character is consciously chasing, but it does drive them in a kind of like involuntary way. Now, you can know all of that stuff and still end up with a story that is maybe lacking in one or the other of these two drives. You wouldn't think that it would make that much of a difference, but it actually does. I'm realizing that you do pick up on it when one or the other of those things is not really clearly defined. Let's hop back to that show I mentioned earlier. Basic premise. You've got this super smart, super ambitious kid who's also dirt poor, and you've got this rich kid who is also like the illegitimate son of his family, so he's sort of exiled. Essentially, these two kids team up to take over the most powerful company in their country, using the smart kid as like the brains of the operation and the rich kid as the face of the operation. And eventually there's a girl that joins them too, but they all have the same goal. To be clear, I was right in there, guys. Fully invested, like it got me hooked on Korean dramas and Korean storytelling, and now I have a 3-week streak on Duolingo for learning Korean. However, there were some fundamental issues with the characters that I couldn't fully articulate at first. Like you could tell that something was missing, but it wasn't until I kind of saw other people's thoughts that I put the pieces together and realized it did come down to that issue of external and internal drives. One thing in the show was always clear. We always knew what the external goal was. They're all trying to make it to the top of this company. That was driven home very clearly. The issue was more the internal side of things. Like, why do they all want this so badly? You got hints, in fairness. The seeds were planted, but for me, I felt like those hints weren't quite fleshed out enough to bear the weight of what these characters were willing to do for their goals. Like, if you're gonna become a person who pursues wealth and power over everything else, like, goodness gracious, I wanna know exactly what the childhood trauma was that caused you to be like this. Even though the hints were there, I just felt like they were not in proportion, I guess you could say, the internal and external drives. Because the thing is, when that internal drive is clearly articulated, I feel like we as the viewer or reader are more likely to support the character in their external goal, even if it's an external goal that like I can't really relate to. But again, really enjoyed the show. And that's just one example. I've also done it. Shall we have a book club moment, guys? Hi there, I'm Niki Florica, and this is The Heir of Ariad. If you are interested in this story, feel free to follow me on Instagram or on my blog so that you will be among the first to know when/if I eventually finish the rewrite of this story. So, The Heir of Ariad had a few problems, but one of the ones I really struggled with as a writer was the fact that I really could not connect with my main character. And I didn't know why, because he was such a good guy. I mean, he always did the right thing, he was helpful, he was objectively good looking. What did I miss? In hindsight, I don't think that I had put a ton of work into his internal drive. I definitely knew what his external goal was. He was trying to get from A to B. That was articulated reasonably clearly, I think. But as far as his internal character, the things that drove him on an emotional level, in some ways, like, it did make it onto the page. Like, it was there in a sense, but I think he would have benefited if I had taken the time to really flesh that out beforehand and pin it down in a concrete way. Since then, thankfully, I understand him a lot better, and I'm still actively working on pinning some of those things down. So I'm super thankful to all the writing mentors in my life who have since taught me the importance of the external goal versus the internal drive, and the importance of both. Because I think, to sum it all up, you do need both in pretty equal measures. Maybe the emotional side of things, the internal need, is even more important than the external goal. That's just me thinking out loud. I mean, when you think about it, you can have a character who's super complex and has a really strong internal drive. But if he has no goal whatsoever, he'll just sit around thinking about stuff and never feel motivated to actually do anything, which I'm sure someone has done in literary fiction. I mean, I'm confident that I've read something like that, which is fine, but for more genre fiction, I feel like that just doesn't really work as well. You need some kind of cat to save, or ring to destroy, or goal to achieve. That gives the story its like forward movement, but the emotional side of things is what gives it its heart and the emotional payoff that the reader is really buying into. That's just how I see it anyway, but as usual, this is just me externally processing things that I'm learning. Take it all with a grain of salt. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.